Hello there, friends and neighbors. Thanks for coming back to my channel. This is me, Stella Hendricks, back again. You thought you got rid of me, but I came back around. Okay, today we're gonna do something a little bit different. This is Great West, October 1973. True stories of old frontier days. Highly questionable. Okay, so I grew up in Nevada and I loved going to Virginia City, this fantastic quasi ghost town that's up in the mountains nearby. It's tons of fun, and of course I love learning about all the scandalous figures and the red light ladies up there, and there's none more famous than Julia Bulette. Like a lot of famous people from the Wild West, there are a lot of tall tales that go along with her, and you see pretty much all of them, or at least a good couple of them, in this particular magazine as well. I kind of embrace the tall tales that go along with the legend of these people. One, because it's difficult for us to know all of the truth about any given, historical figure, especially ones like prostitutes or outlaws back in the day, because they didn't really leave tons of records behind, and because being notorious, people want to come up with stories about them all the time. So I think the legends are kind of fun, and I like to attach them to the real person, but I also think it's important when we acknowledge that things aren't the actual 100% historical truth. So we're gonna have a lot of fun with our Julia Bulette article. Now that is a real picture of her. There are some debated pictures out there, but that one is pretty across the board acknowledged to be legit. Also, I noticed that this person, E.D. Ketchum, who wrote this article, I really tried to find more information about them, and they are mysterious. They cannot be found, probably because they are so ashamed of the lies they told to the poor people of Great West who were just trying to tell true stories from the old frontier days. Okay. During an important auction of city lots in the gold rush days in San Francisco, a man stuck his head into the auction room and yelled, "Two ladies are going by on the sidewalk." Reportedly, all the men rushed into the street, baring their heads in respect as they watched the ladies passing by. This anecdote illustrates the law of supply and demand. Any commodity both greatly desired and hard to find becomes overvalued in the market. Whether these ladies were ugly or beautiful, they were treated with respect that bordered on worship. One young 49er even borrowed a mule and rode 40 miles to another mining camp simply to get a look at a woman reported to be living there. Such admiration and adulation had a profound effect upon the women of the West. It encouraged estranged, immoderate conduct among many who flaunted elegant homes, costly dress, and unusual carriage trappings. Some were given to appearing in mannish styles, while others dressed in scanty ladies' apparel. And, as one might expect, sex played a large role in the civilizing of the West. As one old-timer put it, "Many's the miner who'd never wash his face or comb his hair. If it wasn't for thinking of the sportin' gals he might meet in the saloons." A favorite bawdy ballad of those early years went, "First came the miners to work in the mine, then came the ladies who lived on the line." The line was the row of houses found in every town that constituted the red light district. They ranged from drafty shacks to large parlor houses. The higher class prostitutes were usually inmates of the parlor house, where they fitted into the baroque and plush background of the time. Men's tastes and setting leaned towards the opulent, possibly because the glittering display of the saloons was such a striking contrast to the drab, harsh lives of the miners. The top-ranked courtesans had time and money for high living. For many, it was a stepping stone upwards. They married rich men and became prominent members of society. Among the best known of the shady ladies was Julia Bulette, who claimed to be a native of London. Her background is really unknown, but she had spent several years in New Orleans and then in various West Coast towns. Then Julia followed the rush to the Comstock Lode in 1860. I'll show you these other pictures too. The richest mine in the lode was situated directly below Virginia City, a town which quickly grew to a population of 30,000, with a single mine producing $150 million worth of gold and silver ore. For a woman, the pickings were rich in such surroundings. Julia, who reputedly received $1,000 a night, there are some fabulous tales in this, soon became ranking courtesan of Virginia City in her Rococo establishment at the corner of Union and D Streets. Just beyond was the Silver Dollar Hotel, and next door the Skydeck Saloon. Julia's Palace, as it was called, was the cultural center of the town, offering good conversation, fine wines and champagnes, and delicious French dishes. During her entertainments, Julia permitted no roughhousing. Okay, so I have seen these stories of Julia's Palace floating around places. Patently untrue. She was an independent prostitute who supported herself and did pretty well, and she lived in a tidy, neat, respectable little crib establishment, but she was never a madam, and there was none of this Rococo Baroque French champagne business going on either. I've made other videos on Julia, and so if you want to know the true story about it, I mean, the information's really right out there, but I just can't let that go without saying something. I love that story, but it's not true, and I think people came up with that idea from an episode of Bonanza. I'm serious. You know the Ponderosa Ranch show? Yes, that's the one. Anyway, I love it. I think it's a great tall tale, but it is a tall tale. For 7 years, Miss Bulette held forth as Queen of Virginia City and was much loved for her generosity and kindness. She sent food, clothing, and money to the poor and to widows of men killed in mines. She contributed lavishly to the Sanitation Fund, a sort of early Red Cross instituted by President Lincoln. During epidemics, Julia helped to nurse the sick, restoring health with her charm and optimism as much as by her administration of medication. In the early days, when the town was in danger of Indian attack, Julia remained to nurse the wounded, while the other women sought refuge in nearby Carson City. Julia stayed to cheer the 750 men who marched to meet and defeat the Paiutes at Pinnacle Mount. Poor Paiutes. The highest honors were presented to Julia. She was the only woman in history to be an honorary member of Fire Engine Company No. 1. Now this part is true. And Julia took the title seriously. When the town was threatened with fire, she was there with coffee and food for the tired, sooty firefighters, and she was even known to assist at the pumps on occasion. I don't know if that's true, but let's go with it. On holidays, the fair Julia rode enthroned on the gleaming silver and brass fire engine. I think she only did that one time, but that's okay. Such a time was the 4th of July parade, when she was the elected queen of the event. Crowned with a fireman's hat, the lady carried the glittering brass fire trumpet stuffed with red roses, presented by Tom Peasley, owner of the Sazerac Saloon, who was organizer and boss of the volunteer fire brigade. In appreciation, Julia embroidered banners for the fire engines to fly as they sped to put out the blazes. She also fell in love with Tom Peasley. I have heard of that. Oh, so if you look at this picture of her, you see the fireman's hat over there. So this is taken on that occasion. So that's kind of cool. The good women of the town were horrified at the social prominence of the lovely Miss Bulette. Okay, this is also something that I'm just gonna stop this right here. Okay, it was not the good women of the town who were horrified by it. It was everyone who was subscribing to a religious patriarchal mindset And yeah, there were good women who felt that way, but there were plenty of men too. So I love how we're pitting the women against each other. Cute, but that's not accurate. So some tall tales are fun and some of them suck, and we're gonna get rid of them. That's what's gonna happen here. So the patriarchal residents of the town were horrified at the social prominence of the lovely Miss Bulette. They were further incensed when La Bulette was honored by the Virginia City and Truckee Railroad, for the company named their club car for her. Also, one of the Comstock mines had been dubbed Julia. It irritated the patriarchy to see the courtesan helping build and erect a huge floral arch over the main street in preparation for the welcoming of Governor Nye in 1864, when Nevada achieved statehood. But the arch had been Julia's own idea, which the men of Virginia City hastened to implement. But each day, the patriarchal people were treated to the sight of Julia Bulette, elegantly gowned, taking her daily ride along C Street in her lacquered brougham. I assure you, she had nothing of the sort. The doors of the coach were decorated with a crest of her own design, an escutcheon of 4 aces crowned by a lion couchant. Okay, I don't know what any of that is. I don't know that that's true, but it sounds great, and I'm probably going to try to come up with some kind of like image that fits that description, because that's delightful. I like that one. In this fancy rig, she attended productions at McGuire's Opera House. What about Piper's Opera House? That's the cooler one. Opera House, where, with Tom Peasley, she sat in her private box, which had been veiled with gauze fabric in order to protect the gentility from the view of a woman whose favors were for sale. In summer, Julia's evening garb included an opera hood of white silk and purple velvet, while in winter she wore a sable cape with sable wristlets and carried a matching muff. Always she was bedecked with the finest diamonds, rubies, and corals. But Julia Bulette's successful reign came to a violent end on January 20th, 1867. At 11:30 that Sunday morning, Gertrude Holmes, another lady of the line, entered Julia's home through the unlocked back door. Gertrude intended to have breakfast with her friend Julia. Receiving no answer to her call, the visitor proceeded to the bedroom, where she found the body of Julia Bulette. The corpse was lying on the bed, the head on the pillow, the legs protruding one side from under the covers. Her clothes lay on the floor beside the bed, as though she had dropped them where she had stepped out of them. She had been dead from 6 to 8 hours, apparently beaten with a stick of wood, then a pistol, and strangled to death. A newsboy told the authorities about having heard a scream from the vicinity of Julia's house about 5 o'clock a.m. as he was delivering newspapers. Authorities also questioned a Chinese man who had brought the day's wood and lighted a fire in the living room. Also, poor Chinese people back then. Jeez, people were so mean to them. Life was so mean back then, dude. I'm glad I'm alive now. Believing Julia to be asleep, he had left without disturbing her. Motive for the murder of the 35-year-old Julia had obviously been robbery. The killer had looted the entire house. The headline in the Territorial Enterprise screamed, "Horrible murder! Woman strangled to death in her bed. Blood-curdling tragedy in the heart of the city." They really did have great headlines back then, I gotta tell you. Julia was given a fine funeral. The procession included 18 carriages and the marching men of the Engine Company No. 1. The Nevada Militia Brigade band played a funeral song as the silver-handled coffin was borne from the firehouse to B Street to Flower Hill Cemetery in a black-plumed, glass-walled hearse. The town's puritanical citizens hid behind closed shutters and drawn shades lest they see the wicked in the funeral procession. They must have been relieved to hear boisterous strains of "The Girl I Left Behind Me" as the mourners returned from the cemetery, for the patriarchs knew that Julia Bulette was no longer a thorn in their flesh. One of the persons who had sat up with the corpse at the wake that night following the murder was one John Mullane. Mullane had also been one of those who wore a black crepe armband and walked with the funerary cortege to Flowery Hill, the cemetery reserved for the ladies of the line. About 3 months after Julia Bulette was laid to rest, Mullane was recognized by another of her friends, Martha Camp, as the man she herself had surprised robbing her room. Mullane, wielding a vicious knife, had escaped. But a few days later, Martha saw him on C Street and had him arrested for robbery and attempted murder. While being held on these charges, evidence was found connecting Mullane with the death of Julia Bulette. He was found in possession of the dead woman's jewelry. It was also discovered that he had sold to a Mrs. Kazentray of Gold Hill for $40 a dress pattern which had belonged to Julia. Upon further investigation, the authorities learned that Mullane had sold a diamond pin of Julia's to a Mr. Nye, a local jeweler. Eventually, the police found other damning evidence among Mullane's possessions: 4 silk dresses, a swan's down trimmed negligee, gilded lace cloths, an initialed silver cup, silk handkerchiefs embroidered Julia, red silk stockings, her sables and velvet opera hood, even a silver brick engraved with her name, plus an assortment of jewelry. Confronted with this evidence, Mullane informally admitted to the murder, but later recanted his confession at the trial. He declared that a man named Blair had committed the actual murder, but that he, Mullane, had only taken part in the robbery. Later, when placed in a room with Blair, Mullane failed to identify the man he had accused. The Territorial Enterprise wrote, "Nothing that has occurred of late has created so profound a sensation among all the classes of citizens as the discovery of the murderer of Julia Bulette." This statement was true in many different ways. Though the patriarchal people in Virginia City may have deplored murder, they nevertheless considered John Mullane an instrument of divine retribution. He had rid the town of the infamous Julia Bulette, and they visited him in jail with gifts of pâté de foie gras, calf's foot jelly, fried chicken, cakes, wines, and other delicacies. They even circulated a petition to get his sentence commuted to life imprisonment by the governor of Nevada. The patriarchs, however, were no match for the gentlemen in this case. In his summation before the jury, prosecuting attorney Bishop said, "Although this community has, in times past, seen blood run like water, yet in most cases there was some case brought forward in justification of the deed, some pretext. But on the morning of the 20th of January last, this community, so hardened by previous deeds of blood, was struck dumb with horror by a deed which carried dread to the heart of everyone, a deed more fiendish, more horrible than ever before perpetrated on this side of the snowy Sierras. Julia Bulette was found laying dead in her bed, foully murdered, and stiff and cold in her clotted gore." Good Lord. True, she was a woman of easy virtue. Yet hundreds in this city have had cause to bless her name for her many acts of charity. So much worse for the crime. That woman probably had more real warm friends in this community than any other, yet there was found at last a human being so fiendish and base as to crawl into her bedside in the dead hour of night, and with violent hands beat and strangle her to death, not for revenge, but in order to plunder her of these very articles of clothing," and continued on page 45. Let's find 45. Here we go. Alas, there are no pictures. Jewelry we see before us. What inhuman, unparalleled barbarity! Once more, the Territorial Enterprise editorialized, "We believe that the man will be hung. If he is not, we do not know where is a fit subject for hanging to be found." It is true that the citizens of Virginia City, they went pretty hard in favor of Julia Bulette and her being just a prostitute. It was really remarkable. It really kind of showed how egalitarian many of the towns and situations of the Old West had the potential to be. Like, we've talked about how bad they treated the Chinese and the Paiutes and like everyone. They treated everyone so bad, but you can see like glimmers of hope like this that I think are so beautiful. Anyway, John Mullane was convicted, and despite the appeal by his lawyer, Charles E. DeLong, a rehearsing was refused by the Supreme Court. Sentence was scheduled to be carried out on April 27, 1867, between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. Julia Bulette's grandiose funeral paled before the immensity of the execution. A holiday atmosphere prevailed through Virginia City. A parade route was prepared from the jail to the Natural Amphitheater a mile from town, where the gallows was to be set up. Meantime, this well-made piece of carpentry was displayed at Benham's carpenter shop, where it had been made. Picture postcards of the condemned man were sold all over to the crowds that gathered from all over the state. Good Lord. At 11:30 a.m., a heavily curtained carriage appeared before the courthouse. Into it climbed John Mullane, Father Minogue of Virginia City. There's a high school in Reno called Minogue High. How funny. Father Minogue of Virginia City, and Father Clark of Carson. The carriage set off, surrounded by 40 special deputies armed with Henry rifles and 60 members of the National Guard in full uniform with loaded rifles and fixed bayonets. The group was joined by a carriage of physicians and another with members of the press. The hearse, with its black draped coffin, completed the official party. The audience was a strange mingling of people. Chinese with their pigtails, Indian braves, and squaws with their papooses on their backs, millers, miners, merchants, and of course prostitutes. Many took picnic lunches and prepared to enjoy the box office drama. The star of the show did not let them down. On the gallows, Mullane listened to Sheriff Liconi read a death warrant. Next, Mullane read a prepared statement in his native French, and then in exemplary English reiterated his innocence of the foul crime. He thanked the patriarchal people of Virginia City for their many favors to him during his trial and imprisonment. The noose was adjusted, the black hood pulled over Mullane's face, and the trap sprung. John Mullane dropped 8 feet and died with appropriate twitchings. What the fuck? The bloodlust of the crowd had been satisfied. Ironically, John Mullane, having obtained absolution before hanging, was buried in the Catholic cemetery, but his gravesite is no longer known. Really? I want to know where it is. Though Julia Bulette, due to her occupation, was not allowed burial in the same hallowed ground as her murderer, her well-kept grave on Flowery Hill may still be seen. Also, this is a lie. We have no idea where Julia's grave actually is. But they tell people that's where it is, so they have somewhere to take the tourists. The people of Virginia City keep its picket fence freshly painted, for to them Julia Bulette was not a common prostitute. She was a lusty, dark-eyed beauty, a lady of culture and refinement, generous, understanding, compassionate, and sympathetic, the greatest of the ladies of the line. I actually love that. Say what you mean. Okay, I stutter sometimes. In Virginia City, there used to be this thing called the Mark Twain bookstore, and Mark Twain, he lived in Virginia City for a couple of years, and he actually wrote a very interesting article describing the hanging of John Mullane. And, you know, it has his characteristic wit, although, pardon me, it's clearly like kind of macabre subject matter, shall we say. But I think it's super, super interesting. I'm going to start talking more about historical figures and more fascinating and scandalous women who I find so interesting. And if you have any suggestions, I would totally love that. I always appreciate comments. And until then, don't do anything I wouldn't do. And I'll catch you on the flip side. Take care.